what a difference it makes when you come together in person versus if you're like talking digitally. I mean, honestly, I feel like we've probably in the last 2 years talked how many times? Like about 200-300 times. Okay, dozens. we're totally in sync with that. I mean, I never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So like, I told 200.
Yeah, maybe 200.
But it's so much different. Like the couple times we saw each other in person was insane and just so special. And I feel like that is exactly what we need to talk about today, especially is the magnitude of how a relationship elevates in its authenticity and your connection, right? Like the actual connection you make with a human being.
They intuitively understand sometimes maybe that it is important to be with others and come together. I do find employers finding it hard to maybe articulate the why behind why they want people back in a workspace, not all the time, but at times. And so, you know, how do you break down the importance of that why?
Talked about this last night over Das Boot. It's the sunken cost fallacy. It is every executive out there has real estate and they have a big fat bill on there. And so they feel pressure to absolutely immediately do something with exactly what they have because they've already invested such a large amount. And I feel bad for a lot of companies that have gotten to that point because unfortunately we have had the largest shift we've ever had in my opinion, our workforce for the last 100 years that is now demanding something completely and totally different. And so unfortunately, I think that, you know, what's going to happen is you have to look at the office as, you know, this is obviously not supporting the way people are working because they're obviously not willing to return. And I don't think it's just because of the commute, because quite frankly, I flew all the way out to Jasper, Indiana to see you guys for an experience and to be together. And so there are reasons why people commute. There are reasons why people travel. And there are reasons, you know, you'll drive all the way downtown to go to a cool hotel and hang out with, you know, your coworkers there. But so it's not that the commute is what's killing people and possibly the everyday commute. I definitely get that. And we're going to talk about that. But the reality is when you get to that space, it's not supporting your work needs. And honestly, I don't think it's supporting people's emotional needs. And I think those are two areas that we need to start taking account because, I mean, I just think about someone who's been through something in the last couple of years, like emotionally, you know, maybe they were isolated. So maybe now they get anxiety when they walk into a space with a lot of people. And now you're supposed to work in this free address hybrid environment where there's no desks and no departments and you don't have your core team that you can just go sit with and that's comfortable. So you've not only taken people who've been in situations that they're probably overwhelmed from, but now they're supposed to turn into this new scenario and just wing it. There is no plan right now with most companies. And that's what I think the biggest issue is.
So what are some of the strategies that a company can do right now to have a more kind of to raise their EQ, their emotional intelligence in their workplace with how they physically set it up?
You can probably speak to this more, but just the vulnerability with one another. I think, you know, workplaces and corporate institutions have not been vulnerable with one another. We talked a little bit about this last night too, but it's just kind of dropping that layer and getting down into the meat and understanding, you know, getting back to the culture, why companies exist. Why did we start this to begin with? I think we kind of lost sight of that to bring that emotional piece back for people so that people know why they even joined the company to begin with, really to get back to the heart of what makes companies tick. And I think that will help. You know, you talk about, you know, I don't have to go in, or I don't have to, but when we want to do something, we do it. It's not because of a commute. It's because I want to be there, because I want to be a part of that culture. I want to be a part of that team. I want to be a part of those relationships. And so we have to, I think companies have to dig really deep into themselves and not look for a blanket answer to what the workplace or what the, you know, what things are supposed to look like, but understand that all of us have a uniqueness. Every company, every culture has uniqueness. Let's get back to the heart of what that is that makes us unique and makes us tick, and then celebrate the heck out of it with our people. You know, give people that value, that understanding that they are a part of something bigger than themselves. Like, that's why we do what we do every day. I mean, you spend so much of your life and your time within these companies that you work for. I mean, I want to know that that company has my back, just like I want to go and have its back, you know, and I want to fight for. And I think we lost a little bit of that And then I think that was pre-pandemic, and then the pandemic hit. You shove all these people home, and then you want them to force them back into this sameness. And it's like, no, I've had enough of that. What are we going to do to come together to be different? And I think that's some of the biggest things that I think companies need to rethink their culture, rethink their vision, reset that, and recommunicate it back to their people, so that we all kind of come together again for something, powerful.
I love the idea of introspection in a company, like a company looking into themselves. Is that easy to do? Or when you lead businesses through this, where do people usually stumble in that process?
That's right. The self-awareness part of emotional intelligence. And it's interesting, everything Molly was saying, I agree with, because, the fact is that we were, again, last night, we had a great dinner. And I think that, again, we need to remember that sometimes it's the moments that we kind of let our guard down, just hang out, and we're humans, that we actually have our best conversations. So we keep referring back to that, I think, because we were all just relaxed and having such a good time and not trying to be too professional. And I think that level of authenticity and vulnerability that we were giving each other forms and forges stronger relationships and bonds. And I think that's what managers need to focus on. They need to be more accessible. This whole keep distance that used to really work for when you were actually managing something, where you were actually, in front of that person, you almost had to kind of run the front lines of, the groups that were within the office. Well, managers no longer can see employees on a regular basis. It's a very crazy trust exercise that they're pulling off. And so the only way for them to work with these employees now is to inspire them and to actually help them feel driven to be a part of the purpose of the company. And I do love, for example, going into your headquarters today, just the warmth and the kindness are just little things I think people take for granted. I think companies think that they need to have these marble surfaces and very sophisticated lines and, the highest level of design, but it's really not that. I mean, not to say that your space was absolutely gorgeous, but it was really the people that walking in the door, getting a cup of coffee called Sleigh Ride. I mean, it's the moments that you have that are memorable and they're unique. And quite frankly, I actually think that hospitality is going to play a huge role in the future of the workplace. And I've seen that in the technology world, where a lot of the tech firms have done that for the last 10 years. But since the dawn of COVID, when they were trying to get employees back, they were doing it 10 times more. They were doing more events. They were doing more, purposeful visits to the office. I mean, they even had a time where every Wednesday was a fun activity and something would surprise the employees. Like they have an ice cream cart going down the hallways, or one day they had a farmer's market where you could go and pick all the vegetables you wanted, which, by the way, also supports a healthy lifestyle and some of the employees were texting on their chat going, oh, I wish I was there that day. So it's, how do we kind of create a little more FOMO as well? Ooh, kind of get the vibe going where people want to hang out there versus, I mean, it is the saddest thought in the world to go to an office and sit in a cubicle by yourself and stare at a screen. That is honestly the saddest existence now, because we have that at home and we're good, right? Our home is now officially our personal space. I actually think, though, if you do have personal space in the office, those need to be almost like a micro private office. And I think the meeting rooms need to be more open and agile and flexible. So therefore, they can support more of this spontaneous interaction and collaboration that we're all hoping for. Although hopefully today we can come up with a new word for collaboration, because
no kidding.
Feels a little dated.
I want to go into a couple things here. I love the idea of an office that facilitates warmth and kindness, the way that you put it. That has to look different than the spaces we're used to making, right? There was a lot of talk about productivity, right, and collaboration, which are important. But how do you, what are some steps you might take to create a space that supports hospitality?
I mean, I think it's the whole idea is putting people first. And so, we try, within our spaces is to really try to create kind of this homeful feel. And that's kind of what our brand is kind of stood for, really natural elements, really just trying to think of all of those things from that exterior that we all need to be healthier in life, all those exterior elements, the biophilia, the nature, bringing that indoors, bringing that warmth, bringing those tones into the space, but really designing those spaces with the intent of what you want to happen. And you were just talking about like the meeting spaces, let's make those more flexible because there's different teams and different dynamics that are going to be happening within that space. And so how do those spaces transform to support those different needs that are coming in? And it's really getting people involved in that conversation too, right? Understanding what the needs of those groups are. And I think managers are going to have a big play in all of this going forward, fighting for their people, understanding their people better than anybody else, better than HR. HR understands, that overarching perspective of the company, but the managers truly understand what their people need.
And it's funny, by the way, because a lot of the clients I've talked with, we did some workshops across the US and we got about 30 clients in each city, in New York, Boston, San Francisco twice. We're going to do one in Seattle and Chicago. And we had all these corporate real estate executives sharing their biggest challenges. And ironically, one of the biggest issues they're having right now is that teams are coming back together, the entire department sometimes, and there's no schedule around it. And so sometimes you can have a day when all the teams come back and it's utter chaos. I literally just talked to a client from LA that was telling me about this. And by the way, they're coming back to a space that is, again, full of workstations and private offices. And what do you do? How do you actually outfit the space to support that? And another client in San Francisco talked about this where they realized they're like, well, it's not that like we don't want, like the boardroom's not dead per se, but it needs to evolve, and it needs to evolve into an event space, and it needs to support that. We don't need this like super long table anymore, but like what does the room look like? Also, if there's people calling in, we should stop this like on the pedestal video screen where we have, if there's one person that's video calling in, you seriously feel like you're looking down like a deity and just going, hi. It's very awkward and very intense. So what if everyone had their own little personal like mobile screen that you could pull them up in a chair next to everybody? Or if you have a breakaway team meeting, they could be pulled along with you. That creates more inclusion with the remote workers who possibly might not ever be able to come into the office. And you need to think about that moving forward. It is a nonstop. The issue with this, they call mixed presence communication, is going to be, in my opinion, our biggest challenge moving forward in the future is how do we manage that? Because I have to do workshops with half of my people calling in and then the other half are there in person. So how do I not make the people in person feel completely left out and completely ignored? Whereas with the people calling in on the phone, where you don't want to ignore them either, but you also can't even see who's calling in because, the screen's being shared for something. So there's all these just little tiny dots and I'm going, so that just, it's not possible. So we have to fix that. That is an issue within the space because the space is not built to support that. And so we need a flexible technology solution because we know technology changes, like boom, boom, boom. Every 6 months it's something new, but it needs to be thinking about that. It needs to be thinking about the users at home, the users in the workplace. How do we make that work for everyone? And I think that will also solve a lot of the reasons why some people don't see any use in coming to the office because it's not effective right now.
Yeah, that mixed presence I think is really interesting. This idea of, you called the space should be more like an event space. I thought that was an interesting choice of words. As we think about like the new team space, like what a team space is, I'm just going to try this exercise out with you. Can we do a checklist? Is that possible? I know you talked a lot about listening, Molly, and how every space should be different and be tailored. But, the nature of team in general probably has some similarities across businesses and across teams. Is there a checklist we can make for team spaces? Like how to develop a great team-centered office environment? What would a team space should have blank?
Blankety, blankety, blank. Should we volley back and forth?
Let's do it.
Okay. I would start, I think priority number one is the group gathering environment needs to be the highest level of flexibility to support an all-day event. And so you need to have the mixed presence communication problem fixed, but also you need to have, it needs to be comfortable seating, not the boardroom chairs, right? Those, you're not in there for 20 minutes or an hour anymore. You're there probably all day on an offsite. And I think it just, the highest level of flexibility within that environment. And also you need a chance to be able to close it off, but also open it up for when you go and you want to mingle or you want to run into people. And so what does that look like? We're still working on that, but I mean, it's really has a lot to do, I think, with how do you manage sound and how do you manage visual distractions? How do you kind of close something off when you need to, but then open it up when you don't? right? Because you also want people to feel that they can come say hi or they can come see you, but you also have to visually communicate when they shouldn't.
Yes, I love that flexibility. All right. Is there another aspect of team space that would make it successful?
I feel like, and you were talking a little bit about this, but it's, creating that intimacy, that occlusion, and that equality between anybody that is in person and remote. There is a real disconnect between that. And I think that's when you talk about a boardroom, that, a big, large conference room, that's the hardest thing that needs to be rethought completely. And so when thinking about team space, and we try to think about this a lot when we're developing products, is how do we lower that screen, make that environment more intimate and inclusive so it feels like that person is sitting right next to you. And so when we create these team spaces, wherever, that evolves to, I think, flexibility, adaptability, being able to change the space and being able to be inclusive, I think are all really super important aspects of the space.
So we've got flexibility, we've got inclusion on our checklist.
Okay, I'm going to share one that I think we've all talked about, but we're doing nothing about, is the ability to manage distractions in a real way. Because there's so many times people come back and they have to get on a video call and they have to sit at an open plan workstation, or they go and take over an entire meeting space. And there's no solution for micro spaces that are, of course you have the phone booths, but quite frankly, I feel claustrophobic in those. I feel overwhelmed. And I think it's really more about the sound absorption part that people need and a little bit of visual privacy. And so, what are the quick touchdown points? I mean, almost like a phone booth, but open more, but also not having your back to a wall. You don't want to face a wall and have your back to everyone else. That's a very bad feng shui approach, right? You just feel very uncomfortable.
You feel kind of on display in those almost too, the way you're just standing there by
I would almost call
yourself.
them like a nook or something, a little place you can kind of tuck away. Yes. Also, almost along that same lines, if we're going to stay with the distractions part, something that's a sensory deprivation zone. Because we forget that there's so many people out there. I personally, we talked about it, I'm an empath. And so when I walk in a room, although I am, obviously outspoken, I feel every single person's feelings.
Yes.
And over time, that is exhausting for me. And while I love it and I feel, by the way, I actually get more energy from positive interactions. So if you've noticed, my energy has been kind of crazy this week. Thanks, guys. But if it's a toxic environment, or if someone's very negative, that's very, very draining for an empath, because you actually feel that toxicity for them. And so and I know that there's other people that are neuroatypical, but just to have a place that you can honestly zone out for even 2 minutes, even 5 minutes, that has no sound, has no lighting, that's bright, very, very dim, and you can just kind of get away and just breathe maybe even for 5 minutes. So I actually have been to Headspace's headquarters, which is a super cool office.
Oh, wow.
And they have these little meditation pods, and they're really tiny and they're super easy. You just kind of close the curtain, you go over there, and there is no technology in there. People are not allowed to go bother you. It's in a very quiet area in the corner, but it's how they're supporting the mental health and well-being of their employees. Because, if you're going to be that as a company, I mean, that's the highest level of, technology well-being. They've at least figured out a way for people to get away and take a moment to breathe.
Well, you stole mine, because I was going to add that. I was going to say that I felt like that is a big taken care of area within the workplace is really taking care of people's mental health. And we all have mental health, and you don't have to be on a spectrum to have mental health. And I think the last few years have shown us that we've all suffered right together, and we're coming out of this with a lot of things that have impacted us in a negative way. And so how are our workplaces going to do a better job of first of all, leveling up the empathy, second of all, being aware of the fact that, we have to take care of, it's not just the physical wellness that we need to take care of with the, gyms and the cafes and, all of those things, which I think are very important, but taking care of that mental health, allowing people and encouraging people that opportunity to step away, to go into those meditation pods and I think that's going to be a leadership down too. Hey, I, being a leader, want to show that I need this too. Our world is showing us there's a lot of people struggling right now, a lot. And a lot of those people are in our workplaces. And if we don't do more and a better job of taking care of that, we're really, really missing out on something that is one of the most critical layers of making our environments places people want and feel okay and feel encouraged to come back to. So I love that you were making that point on it. I was going to go on it and you like nailed it.
I actually think that what you added and like to that point actually is an additional piece. I mean, why can't we be able to, feel mentally or psychological safety within every environment we go to? But also, when I first had my children, I was told by a mom, there are days where your kids are going to win and work loses. And then there's days that work's going to win and the kids lose. And you can't have it both ways. And I was like, that's the worst thing anyone's ever told me. And I'm so depressed. I just became a new mom. And I'm like, thanks. But since then, I do think that the best part of, we all talk about being at home, is you see people's lives and it does build an understanding of where they're coming from. I mean, I have a great boss where he's like, I'm like, oh, I'm taking Jack to jujitsu at 4:00 because, that's good for my relationship with my son to spend that time with him. And allowing that, but knowing that I'll probably be working at 6 a.m. on a call with New York because that's just, we're in a different world.
Yes.
And I think also a big piece to the mental well-being is to understand that schedules should no longer be so constricted.
Absolutely.
There should be a little bit more of an unconstrained time example as well as unconstrained place.
And all that comes, with trust, right? Between employer and employee, and just knowing and that's where I think we have to shake up the most. We have the most opportunity to just trust and look, at one another as equals and understand that work-life balance thing. And talking about, the kids, some days the kids win, some days work wins. And I'm about to bring tears to my eyes because it's the truth. And, some days the kids win today. And, and I'm lucky I work in an environment with incredible boss and incredible team that understands that about me. And I think as, organizations, we need to level that up. And as managers, and it is a transition, right? And I feel bad for managers sometimes because, a lot of times they haven't had the right coaching to be those really effective bosses that are more coaches than they are necessarily managers anymore. And they're to be a therapist sometimes or emotional support and to say, it's okay if you need to go do X, Y, and Z. And no, I don't have to see you at your desk all day, 8 hours a day, or 9 hours a day, you sign, and it's like, giving that, level of trust and being transparent with one another and just allowing for the world is evolving. Work can happen in a lot of different ways. And so I think if we can break down those barriers and that transition of manager into more of a coach type, role, I think organizations are going to find themselves being more successful and people starting to be able to, feel better about, their life, better about their work, and better about being able to balance that because they feel understood. And then all of a sudden that relationship and that bond between the organization and the employee gets stronger, it gets tighter because you feel taken care of, you feel understood, you feel like they have your back just like you have the back of the organization. And I think there's some changes that need to take place on that just to give us more balance in life because that stress is a big part of the mental health aspect that, we feel completely stressed at all times, like that we can't be 100% of a mom or a dad and 100% of an employee and 100% of this. And it's just like the expectations got so high that it boiled over. And, it's time to reset.
Now we're burnt out.
You burn out completely.
We're done.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why we need to reset. And there's so much opportunity in that, right? So much opportunity to do it different going forward. Be different coaches instead of managers, take care of one another. I think there's a lot of opportunity. If
you look at the stat of how many moms quit during the beginning of the pandemic.
Gosh.
Oh, wow.
I actually had to take the entire summer off to be with my children. And you stress the entire time because you're just like, wait, I'm not allowed to be doing this because I have to work. But it's really this, we can't bring our whole self to work because our whole self is split in half and our souls are kind of a little bit crushed from that.
Yeah.
Whereas I've honestly felt more fulfilled than I've ever felt. Being able to have more balance and more time with my kids actually makes me a better employee. It actually makes me happier. I work harder. And let's be honest, guys, do we really need the 9 to 5 to be what we need to be today? Because we talked about knowledge worker is dead. So do we really need to have 9 to 5 every day, Monday through Friday? By the way, I'm ready to kill Friday. I'm ready to take that day back. How cool would it be to have a 3-day weekend? But do we need that to move forward in our world, because we now have AI and machine learning and all this technology to do a lot of the work for us. So what if we as humans start to adapt in a way that maybe the things that we do are heavier hits, more innovative, more creative, more dynamic, right? And you really go in hard on like a couple things and you do a really good job on those and you do a high level of quality in those versus quantity. Because I'm done with the world of consumption and quantity. I think we need to chill out with that. We need to focus on the quality and the authenticity.
Well, and I loved it. We were talking about it a little bit last night, but, getting out of that roboticness, because, robots are coming in whatever way. It scares the crap out of me. I'm just going to be honest. That conversation made my head spin. I couldn't sleep. But
sorry,
I feel like it's okay. I'm like, I'm worried for my children.
Just
worried for my children.
Go to your quiet corner.
But I feel like, let's, take that uniqueness of what humans bring and stop getting out of all of that, like sameness of like the 8 to 5 and the Monday through Friday, and keeping our life so much the same, and bring that creative element of what humans are, and challenge that. I want to challenge the freaking robots, because I don't want robots taking over my life, because I feel like if they would, I don't feel the same empathy that I would feel from a human that I would from a robot. And I don't want them coming into my world.
They are the worst snugglers.
I know. I cannot imagine. No, but it's, and so it's like refiring up that energy and that creativeness, that, like you said, keep talking about, that knowledge world is gone. What humans are is we're creative and we are amazing beings, and we are a lot of things that whole world and that AI world is never going to be. And so let that AI world come in and do all that monotonous stuff that we don't want to do anyway, and allow humans to level up and just be what we, what got us here today, the species that we are. I think it's pretty incredible. Like,
it is. I mean, you want to talk about a culture shift that spills way past workplace into our education systems.
Oh my God.
Into cultural concepts of what it means to be good at something, or what it means to be professional. All these things, right? They're all changing. It's incredible. So, all right, Regan, when we first spoke, you mentioned something about the gap between who we can be and who we are. And that gap is sometimes felt at an individual level. In this conversation, I'm feeling this gap at an organizational level. Like, the picture that you've both painted looks incredible. How do we get there? And what is that gap right now?
Well, it's actually, it's one of my favorite Latin words, arete, and it's the gap between what you're currently doing and what you're capable of doing. But what's important is, in that gap is where stress, depression, and anxiety lives. Because you're sitting there doing something and you're not your full self, you're not living your best life, right? And so the goal is to allow people to start to explore their strengths and things that they're really good at, and get into more of the creative, as Molly was saying, and go into becoming, your full self. And the only way that you can do that is when you have everything in order. And that's like my other favorite word, eudaimonia, which is when everything is sort of like having your act together. And essentially what it means is that I have my home life, I have my work life, I have my personal life, I have my workout life, whatever. All of those things are in balance and harmony. And I'm sure there's other ways of putting it, I guess. But if we allow people to have that within their lives, I think that's the first step in moving forward. And so what does space mean moving forward and allowing human beings to live their best life? Like, how do we let space allow them? So, like, for example, I love, some of the companies allow you to take about 20% of your current work time and do something creative. We actually have Creative Fridays right now, where you can take a half day and do whatever you want. Like, go paint, you can go read something, you can go, watch a film that you think is interesting. And it's this white space of a blank canvas that we have, that is when I think our best ideas come. I mean, I was telling you about how Netflix, essentially the guys who founded it, it was because they were in between jobs and they had a little free time, and they were just kind of spouting out ideas. And then they threw out the idea of, what if we mail DVDs, versus going to Blockbuster to rent a VHS, and the story finishes itself, right?
Right.
And so, how do we kind of allow employees like less chaos, less focus on productivity, as you said, Molly, because like, what does productivity mean today? Because if there's about 3/5 of all employees are not aligned with the company's vision and strategy. So if you're productive, but you're the wrong kind of productive that doesn't have the right kind of impact, what is the point anyways? Like, you can go to work every day and sit behind a computer, but there's a stat I read once that said 71% of all internet use on a computer is not essentially allowed by the company. They don't want you on that site, right? Because it's
Amazon,
not.
it's Facebook, right? Yeah.
I sat next to a guy once who planned an entire family vacation for 3 weeks straight in a cubicle. That was the only time I was listening going, well, he's been here every day. Well, he's been working every day.
Yeah, right.
But he is not giving to the company because they're not giving back to him. And so it is a new relationship. And it is this like compromise, but also an understanding that you just have to understand, what do employees need, but also what do you need from your employees? And that needs to be communicated. And that's where the managers come in.
And I think that goes back to kind of what we were talking about, where it's almost this reset of even, getting the leadership together to go, okay, let's reevaluate our vision, our purpose, our why, all of those things, and maybe it ends up being the same thing it's always been, but it needs to be recommunicated out, reshared, and in a way that really synergizes everybody. Because I feel like in the last few years we've gotten, and not that I can't say that it was good before. It's just the opportunity, it's kind of exposed, I think, a lot of disconnect between employers and employees is the last few years kind of just more exposed everything. And so it's kind of, taking that energy, looking inward, and then resetting that message out that, so that people can realign with those visions and those values of what the company, is trying to bring, to the world. And I also, when you were talking about too, I think about it from a product standpoint, and you're talking about, the spaces and trying to, get to that level, your best self and your best, what that is. And so when I am thinking about product and developing product, like that was the one thing when I got into kind of the role that I did, is that I never wanted to create another chair to be another chair. One of the biggest things is when we're doing product development is, what is this solving? How is this making somebody's life better? How is that interaction that they're going to have in that space better because of the products that they're going to be interacting with? And I think that that's our job as manufacturers, is to really think about that, to think about the people and how they're interacting with the space. Because for how long now we put people in furniture that they had to figure out how to like function with the furniture versus the furniture being there to function for them and for their purpose. And so I always am trying to think about that and think about the way that, when these products are in the space, how is it making somebody's life easier, better, more productive, more effective, more collaborative, whatever those elements are. I never want it to just be another piece of furniture. And, that's not what our, job is. It's to really up the, ante, up the level of what's happening in these environments, just like so that we ourselves can be that better person, that better version of ourselves as we go into spaces.
I feel like that same philosophy can move from a piece of furniture to an entire space, to an entire company, leveling up, what are you doing for the world today? What are you doing for people today? So I love this conversation. I love that. I feel like we're getting closer. We're closing the gap. We're closing the gap. So,
nailed it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Changing the world.
Solved.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the world's better now.
Right. Well, I do think that there are certain things that people are going to need moving forward, right? This whole new trend of homification has blown up, which, by the way, I love that your creative team literally works in a home. That's so cool to me. I think that's a genius idea. I would love to see companies, so they're all concerned that they have so much real estate and not enough people are coming back. But what I suggest is, if you've got this real estate and you're stuck in a lease or you own that space, then why don't you repurpose your space? You don't need 1 million workstations anymore. Turn that into like living rooms and like actually give teams a space to live, or when they come in, a space they can use as their own and they feel more comfortable. And they were saying something about one of the reasons people love working from home is everything is under 30 feet away. And a lot of corporate headquarters are built where certain things are very far away. And if it's, they used to say if it's more than 25 feet, it might as well be 25 miles because you just don't go. And I've experienced that. I've been to some very large corporate headquarters where you have to walk a very long distance and you're probably just not going to go. Also, it's the very awkward, passerbys of people you see on a regular basis that you're never going to know their name because they're not in your team. They're from a different part, but you always have the awkward like, hi. And I don't know, is that necessary? Or maybe we can make more subcultures within these areas. And some of these larger headquarters are actually looking at that. And they're saying, what if we kind of, siloed off some of these areas where you only see about 50 people in your day and you know every single person? Because it's actually very overwhelming to be in a 1,500 to 3,000 person headquarters. And it's very inauthentic because like we said, it's impossible to know everyone's name. And we talked about Dunbar's numbers. Actually, you can only have about 150 in your brain. So why wouldn't we have it be more relaxing and comfortable? I think people like the home because it's pretty easy for me to know my husband's name.
It is time to get experimental. No question. We've got to experiment. We've got to try new things. This is fantastic. We're just going to need a part 2.
Yay! Let's do it. I love it.